So I always say that no matter what camera you have, try and maximize every single feature that you have on it. Well, to be honest, I've been using the A7 IV for over a year now. I've been using the A7R5 for about 5 months. And there is a common feature between the two of them that I haven't really ever tried to use. And that is the compatibility with CFexpress cards. Now, it's a good thing that Lexar sent me this 160GB CFexpress Type A and the card reader just to test out the difference between CFexpress and SD cards and basically try and see if it is something that I need to use. So in this video, let's talk about whether we should be using CFexpress cards as photographers and if CFexpress cards will eventually replace the SD cards that we all know and love. Now, if you know me, you're probably asking, do you really need a CFexpress card? Obviously, I'm a landscape photographer. I rarely shoot really high-speed stuff. And when I go out to shoot, I don't really shoot as much as portrait or wedding photographers or sports photographers would. There are instances wherein I go out to shoot and I come home with maybe 30, 40, or 50 exposures in my SD card. However, there are actually instances wherein I would shoot really fast-paced stuff, or I would shoot a lot of exposures continuously, such as when I have to shoot in bracketed exposures, at the same time when I have to do HDR panoramas for when I shoot architecture and when I shoot interiors. At the same time, I do anticipate that I'll be shooting with a lot of continuous exposures when I make use of the bracketing for focusing on the A7RV, which is something that we can do to create really detailed landscape images in wide-angle situations. Now, when it comes to storage, there are quite a few things that you would have to think of. Of course, the first one is the speed in terms of writing, the next is the speed in terms of reading, and of course, the overall durability of the card. I have had experiences wherein I went home and I found out that all the images I took were eventually corrupted inside the card because the card was damaged or something, and that really created a sort of fear within me, especially when I do shoot for clients, when I do architecture and interiors. So the one thing I would never want to find out when I come home is that all the photos I took were eventually destroyed inside the card and I don't have any way of recovering them. Sometimes that means having to go back and redo the shoot, but also for other photographers that might mean that you ultimately lose the project, you ultimately lose the event, especially if it's something that cannot be repeated, such as a wedding, for example. So that's why, on top of speed, the durability of the cards is the #1 biggest factor, because it's something that can literally make or break your shot or your shots. Now, memory cards have really come a long way. I remember when I started shooting, my first camera made use of the old CF cards, or the compact flash cards, which is basically the predecessor of the CFexpress cards. But at the same time, it was also the year wherein SD cards are beginning to emerge. And I remember perhaps the first SD card I ever used on my old DSLR camera was, maybe 2 or 4 gigabytes? I don't even remember the speed. Now, I have this 16 gigabyte SD card that I was using maybe around 4 years back. And I can't imagine using this old card in the cameras that I use now. There have been a lot of different types of SD cards, the SD, the SDHC, the SDXC, and we have the V30, V60, V90, and at the same time the UHS class 1, 2, and 3. And basically all of those just simply pertain to the speeds of the cards. Now, if you're watching this, you probably even know this better than I do, but generally, the different types of cards have different capabilities depending on what you're shooting. The original SD cards back then could do around 10 megabytes per second, and nowadays, the highest quality SD cards can do around 299 and 300 Mbps when it comes to reading and writing. And I'm actually using some of those, which are the Sony Tough SD cards. Now in terms of Sony cameras, the first Sony camera that came out with the CFexpress Type A slot was the Sony A7S3, and that actually gives us a really good clue as to why you might want to get a CFexpress card Type A. Obviously, the A7S3 is a very powerful video camera that can shoot 4K with really fast frames per second, and that's precisely the reason why the need for faster cards emerged. Basically, if you're shooting 4K with really fast frames per second, 120 FPS, 240 FPS, then you would have to have a card that can follow the pace of that frame rate. If you're shooting high resolution with frame rates like that, you literally cannot shoot with a slow SD card simply because it will not be able to keep up with the writing of the information. That's why there are video settings from the A7S3, the A7IV, and the A7R5 that cannot be used with just a simple SD card, and instead you're gonna have to use a CFexpress precisely because of the need for the speed. Now, if you shoot video, it doesn't automatically mean that you need a CFexpress card. For me, for example, yes, I create these videos, but I actually don't shoot in 4K. And also, I don't shoot in very fast frame rates. However, I've always wanted to try, which is also why I am quite excited that I do have this card now. Now, here's the important question. As a photographer, why would I want to use a CFexpress card? Again, for transparency, of course, these were sent in by Lexar, but they do not have any control with what I am saying, which is why I am gonna tell you that it's not always necessary. Even earlier, I said that even if you shoot video, you don't automatically need a CFexpress except when you're shooting in 4K and really fast frame rates. At the same time, as a photographer, it's not an absolute need, but there are benefits to it that you might want to look into. Again, number one is the read and write speed. As I said, the other SD cards would do around 150 Mbps, 300 Mbps at best. The CFexpress card can do 900 Mbps. That is around 6 times more than the 150 and of course 3 times more than the 300. But in reality, what is the implication of that speed? Well, if I were, for example, a wedding photographer who has to shoot in really high-speed bursts, simply because you don't want to miss a moment. At the same time, of course, if you're a sports photographer and you're shooting really fast motion from far, far away, and of course, when you are a wildlife photographer and say your subject is a bird, a really rare bird that is flying in a very fast speed, or let's go even extreme, you're photographing a cheetah on safari in Africa, something like that. You want to be able to shoot continuously without any buffering. I just realized now that I really should do something that I've been meaning to try, which is wild bird photography. Maybe soon. Now, as I said, personally, in my landscape photography, it would be quite a rare occurrence that I would have to shoot really fast. However, I do like the fact that the capacity is much higher than the usual SD cards, which means that I can entrust maybe a full day to night time lapse, maybe starting from the sunset all the way to sunrise even, and keep everything in one card. At the same time, when I shoot interiors, when I shoot architecture, there are instances wherein I have to shoot maybe 5, 7, or 9 frames in terms of exposure bracketing, then do maybe 3 or 4 shots of that because I'm using a shift lens. So you can imagine that, yes, I may not be shooting a very fast-moving object or a fleeting moment, for example. But for example, if I'm shooting and I'm after a particular quality of light that might change with the time of day, then I do need to rush. So if I'm shooting 9 exposures times 4 because I'm shifting the lens, I wouldn't want to be bothered by any buffering. Also, this new feature on the A7R5, which is focus bracketing, which is basically automating the shooting process of focus stacking, can actually allow you to shoot up to, if I'm not mistaken, 399 different layers of focusing. I don't think I will be maximizing that number, but I guess if I do find the need for that, maybe in shooting something very close all the way to a very nice background, then a CFexpress card that can write very fast will also save you some time because it will not buffer. Now honestly, of course, I knew that this card is fast. However, what really surprised me was when I was uploading the files on my laptop. Now I can imagine for some photographers who would have to produce a slideshow right after a wedding, or sports photographers who would have to upload right away, this is going to be really helpful for you. But for me, perhaps the simplest and the most obvious thing about CFexpress cards compared to SD cards, on top of the speed, that really attracts me is the quality or the material. Of course, SD cards, as you very well know, are made of plastic, and CFexpress cards are actually made of metal. I can imagine that because of that, this might mean that CFexpress cards are more durable. And in fact, I know that these are metal because also of heat dissipation. There have been instances wherein SD cards have been baked inside the camera because the camera was writing so fast, and I assume that that is the reason why the CFexpress cards are actually made of metal, so that they will be more durable, and also they can be able to dissipate or basically release the heat even faster. And there we go. CFexpress cards, I do think that they are bringing in a lot more possibilities when it comes to video and photo. And I do think that they may be more common than they are now in the near future. I don't think it's impossible that CFexpress cards will replace the SD cards that we are used to, but at the same time, at least for right now, I can say that not everyone needs a CFexpress card, but it would really be good to have at least one or two for when you have that need. In application, I think what I will be doing is I will be using a CFexpress card on one slot and of course an SD card on another slot for all my professional projects, just to be sure that I have redundancy. And the good thing about that is if I'm using 160 gigs on the CFexpress card and I'm using 64 gig on the SD card, then I can just keep the CFexpress card as the main backup, and the one I would have to replace from time to time would be the SD cards. There are a lot of benefits again when it comes to read and write speeds, when it comes to durability, but then again, the answer to whether you in particular need a CFexpress card would of course come from you depending on what you shoot. CFexpress cards are generally pricier, but if you're a photographer and you can afford around one or two with maybe 160 or even 320 gigs, that would be really good to have. And there we go. If you have any questions, leave them down below in the comment section. And if you want to share your answer, let me know in the comments what you shoot, how fast you shoot, and if you think you need to use a CFexpress card. In any case, of course, my name is Nico Valenzuela. I am a landscape and architectural photographer, and this channel talks about landscape and architectural photography, at the same time all the gear and all the tech that I use. If you're into that, then do click that notification bell and hit that subscribe button so that I will see you in the next video. In any case, thank you for watching.